Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're doing something, well, a little different. Usually we look at books that try to fix a problem, how to fix your finances, your marriage, your health.
Right.
But the text we're covering today argues that you can't fix the problem because a problem isn't some bug in the system.
It is the system. That's the core of it. It's a much darker perspective than we're used to.
It really is.
We're looking at Conrad Reicher's massive ebook. Betrayal is their baseline.
And when you say massive, I mean, this thing reads less like a book and more like an indictment.
An indictment? That's a good word. He calls it an autopsy of Western civilization.
Yeah.
And the central thesis is, well, it's uncomfortable.
Very.
Reicher's essentially arguing that everything a modern man thinks he knows about relationships, love, chivalry, equality, it's all a fabrication.
A fabrication. He says men are living in what he calls a matrix of female deceit. And he's not being metaphorical there. He means it literally.
He does. He claims that biology, the legal system, our culture, it's all engineered to extract resources from men and then just discard them.
It's the kind of argument that, usually gets shouted down immediately. But what makes this deep dive so interesting is that Reicher attempts to back this all up.
With a relentless amount of data.
Yeah, evolutionary biology, court statistics, historical analysis, it's a lot. But before we get into all that data, I do need to ask you to hit that like button and subscribe.
Please do.
We're covering material today that, frankly, most platforms would prefer to bury. So if you want to keep getting these deep dives, we really need your support.
Absolutely. The algorithm isn't exactly a fan of this kind of red pill content, so subscribing helps us keep the lights on.
It really does. So let's set the stage properly. The book is Betrayal is their baseline. From Eve to today, always gullible, always evil, and never responsible.
Oh, quite a title.
It's available on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. And honestly, Reicher frames it as a war manual.
That is the perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
He says it right up front. This isn't a self-help book. It's not therapy.
No.
He argues that men have been gaslit into believing their suffering, divorce, heartbreak, losing their kids is just bad luck.
And that's the hook that grabbed me. He argues what we call bad luck is actually a biological and institutional inevitability.
Exactly. His whole mission here is to strip away those illusions. He wants to show how the feminine imperative has captured our institutions, what he calls Marxism in a skirt.
We'll get to that.
And give men the strategies to opt out.
It really feels like he's trying to arm the reader. So if you're listening and you feel like the game is rigged, Reicher is basically offering you the rule book.
Yeah.
You can find the full text on Amazon or Google Play. And I'd also recommend following him at Conrad Reicher on Substack for his ongoing analysis. But let's start where Reicher starts. Biology.
Let's do it.
Okay, so he makes this really specific, provocative claim about human tears that I had never heard before. I mean, I assumed he was being poetic, calling tears a weapon.
Or that it's just, social manipulation.
Right. But he means that literally, doesn't he?
He does. He anchors this whole section on a study published in the journal Science back in 2011. It's a fascinating experiment.
Okay.
Researchers had men sniff two different jars. One had a simple saline solution, just salt water. The other one had actual emotional tears collected from women who were watching sad movies.
They're literally sniffing tears.
Yeah.
So, what happened? Did the men notice a difference?
That's the wild part. Consciously, no, the men couldn't smell any difference at all. The tears had no odor, but biologically, the reaction was immediate and profound.
How profound are we talking?
The men who sniffed the real tears saw a huge drop in sexual arousal, and this is the key part, a rapid drop in their testosterone levels,
How big of a drop?
about 21% on average.
Oh.
And this happened within minutes of exposure.
21% is not a small number. That is a significant physiological effect. So Reicher takes this one data point and builds a whole theory. What's his interpretation of why this happens?
He calls it a biological exploit, chemical castration.
Strong words.
His argument is that evolution didn't design women to cry just to express sadness. He says it evolved as a defense mechanism specifically against men. When a woman cries, she's releasing a chemical signal that hacks the male brain.
How so?
It dampens his aggression, it kills his sex drive, and it basically forces him into a compliant, protective state.
So when a guy is in an argument with his partner and she starts crying and he suddenly feels the fight just drain out of him, he feels like he just needs to apologize and fix it.
Right.
Reicher's saying that's not just empathy kicking in.
Exactly. Reicher argues that's a chemical hack. You are literally being programmed by pheromones to surrender.
Yeah.
And this leads him right into his concept of the Eve reflex.
Right, he gets all the way back to Genesis.
Yeah.
But is he using the Bible as a religious text here, or is it more like a psychological archetype?
Oh, definitely an archetype. He points out that in the story, Eve eats the fruit freely. She makes a choice. But the second she's caught, what does she do?
Points at the serpent.
She points at the serpent. Riker says this is the baseline of the female operating system. Externalize blame. Claim victimhood. Always.
And because the tears work so well on men, that deflection strategy is usually accepted.
Precisely. And he tries to back this up with modern psychology, too. He cites research from the University of Haifa, which notes women cry 5 times more than men.
5 times!
And Riker's take is that it's not because they're 5 times sadder. It's a tactical maneuver. It's a way to shut down conflict and get resources or forgiveness without actually earning it.
He uses a really chilling modern example for this, the Doomsday Mom, Lori Vallow.
That case is a perfect, if horrifying, example of his point about the mask of femininity.
Explain that.
Well, here you have a woman who plotted the deaths of her own children, but she used religion, emotion, maternal affection as a cover. Riker points out how the media struggled to just call her evil. They
Right.
framed it as a tragedy. They focused on her mental state.
If a father did that, the headline is just monster, period.
Exactly. But because she's a mother, the narrative bends itself into knots to find an excuse. And that gap between the action and the accountability. Riker argues that's because men are chemically wired to protect women, so we're blind to female psychopathy until it's way too late.
Okay, so we have this biological baseline where he argues tears and victimhood are weapons, but then he says this hasn't just stayed in the home.
No, it's been codified, it's been institutionalized.
This is where he gets into what he calls the divorce industrial complex.
This is the institutional capture section. And Riker's central thesis here is that modern feminism is actually, in his words, Marxism in a skirt.
That's a very catchy phrase, but what does he actually mean by it? How is it Marxist?
He argues that the goal of the ideology isn't real equality, it's the dismantling of the nuclear family and of male authority.
Okay.
In traditional Marxism, you have the class struggle, right? Proletariat versus bourgeoisie. Riker says this has just been replaced by a gender struggle. The state uses its power to redistribute resources from the oppressor class men to the so-called victim class women.
And the legal system is the enforcement arm. He spends a lot of time on something called the Duluth model. I see this term in men's rights spaces a lot, but what is it exactly?
So the Duluth model is basically a framework that law enforcement uses in domestic violence calls. It was created back in the early 80s. And the core assumption of the Duluth model is that domestic violence is a tool men use to control women.
The core assumption.
Yes. Therefore, in any dispute, the primary aggressor is almost always assumed to be the man.
So how does that play out, on a Friday night when the cops show up to a house?
Riker paints a grim picture. Let's say the police arrive and, I don't know, both people have scratches on them. Or maybe the man is actually the one bleeding.
Okay.
Under the Duluth framework, officers are trained to look for the dominant party, which is usually just interpreted as the physically larger person,
The man.
the man. So even if she started it, even if she hit him first, the man is very often the one who gets arrested. Because the system itself views her violence as defensive and his as oppressive. Riker calls it state-sponsored gaslighting.
And this connects to the financial side, too, with the Violence Against Women Act, or VAOA. Riker claims this is basically a money laundering operation.
He does. He follows the money. He notes that CDC data shows men make up a huge chunk of domestic violence victims. Some studies say up to 40%.
40%.
But Riker points out that federal funding from VLBA is almost exclusively earmarked for female victims. He claims, and I quote, $0 go to male-only shelters.
So you end up with a system that taxes men to fund shelters that reject men based on laws that automatically arrest men.
Correct. It creates this closed loop of funding that depends entirely on maintaining the narrative that men are always the perpetrators.
He also talks about the womb economy, this idea of fertility being treated as currency.
This is one of the darkest parts of the book, I think. Riker argues that because fertility is a depreciating asset, women are driven to maximize its value while they can. He talks about the baby trap and paternity fraud.
How common does he say that is?
He cites studies suggesting it could be anywhere from 2 to 10% of children are being raised by men who don't even know they aren't the biological fathers.
And the courts. They protect this.
Riker argues they absolutely do. He mentions cases where men are forced to pay child support, even after a DNA test proves the child isn't theirs, because the court says it's in the best interest of the child.
Which really means maintaining the mother's income stream.
Over the truth, yes.
Really dismantles the whole idea of a neutral legal system.
Hmm.
Riker calls it the falsehood of equality. He even brings up the military.
Yes, and that's a key part of his argument against physical equality. He cites the statistic that women have, on average, 40 to 50% less upper body strength than men.
That's a well-known biological fact.
Right, yet standards in the military and fire services are constantly lowered or modified to get more women in. Riker calls it tokenism, at the direct expense of combat readiness. We're trading survival for political correctness in his view.
So we have biology weaponized, institutions captured. Let's shift to the dating market, because if the courts are a trap, he says the dating apps are a minefield. Yeah. This is where Riker gets into the psychology of it all. He talks about the beta orbiter and the simp.
This is his analysis of the sexual marketplace. He introduces this concept he calls the algorithm of abandonment.
Algorithm of abandonment, that sounds ruthless.
It is. He uses evolutionary psychology to argue that women are inherently hypergamous.
Define that for us. What does hypergamy mean in this context?
Hypergamy is the instinct to trade up. Riker argues women are biologically hardwired to constantly scan for higher status males. Better genetics, more resources, more social standing.
And this means?
This means, in his view, that female loyalty is always conditional. A woman will discard a partner without guilt if a better option appears, because nature rewards that upgrade.
And this creates what he calls the nice guy paradox, the guys who are told to be chivalrous and supportive, and then they just get friend-zoned or left.
Riker is absolutely brutal on chivalry. He calls it suicide. He argues women fetishize danger, a condition called hybristophilia, while they exploit safe men for resources.
So the nice guy pays the bills, provides the emotional support.
But the actual attraction, the desire, goes to the dangerous man, the bad boy.
He also brings up the digital side of this, the whole simp economy.
Yes, the OnlyFans economy. He points out that something like 92% of creators are female. He argues that digital intimacy has replaced real connection for millions of men.
Oh, so.
Women are monetizing their attention. They're turning men into what he calls emotional ATMs. You pay, you listen, you validate, but you get nothing real in return.
There's another psychological concept he leans on really heavily, BPD, borderline personality disorder. Now, usually we hear about this as a serious mental illness.
Right, and this is controversial, but it's central to his book. Riker suggests that the traits of BPD, that intense fear of abandonment, emotional volatility, manipulation, he says they aren't just a rare pathology. He argues they represent the default female operating system.
So he's saying what we classify as a disorder is actually just female nature, but amplified.
In his view, yes. He argues that high neuroticism and constant emotional escalation are strategies that women use to control the frame of a relationship. If she can keep you off balance with chaos, she maintains control.
Because if you're constantly trying to manage her emotions, you're not leading.
You're serving.
Wow. I mean, it is a lot to take in. It paints such a bleak picture for any guy trying to find a traditional relationship. It almost feels like he's saying the game is just unwinnable. So, what's the solution? What does Riker say men should actually do?
He's very clear on this. You cannot negotiate with this system.
So what then?
You have to opt out. He advocates for the marriage strike.
A marriage strike, just opting out of marriage entirely.
He sees it as a purely rational economic decision. He says if 73% of divorces are initiated by women, and the family courts are rigged to strip you of your assets and your children, then signing a marriage license is, in his words, signing a warrant for your own destruction. It's just risk management.
It's pure risk management.
Exactly. He points to the herbivore men movement in Japan as a kind of precursor. Men who just stopped pursuing women because the cost was too high. They focus on their hobbies, their careers, their peace.
And he also looks back at history for examples of this, of male-only success.
He does. He praises the Spartanagoge and the Benedictine monks. These were societies built on, quote, silence, discipline, and iron will.
Without female influence.
His point is that greatness is forged in male-only spaces where the focus is on duty and achievement, not on managing female emotions. He argues civilization was built by men working together, and it's being dismantled by men catering to women.
And he talks about the trivium, logic, grammar, rhetoric. Why is that specific educational model his solution?
Because that's the intellectual weapon. Riker argues that men have been dumbed down emotionally. We've been trained to accept "I feel" as a valid argument against "I know." He says men have to reclaim the trivium, to dismantle that emotional manipulation. It's about building an immunity.
Immunity to gaslighting.
Exactly. When a man masters logic and rhetoric, he can cut through the tears and the narratives and see the facts. If you know the structure of an argument, you can see when someone is using a logical fallacy to manipulate you.
And he frames this as part of MGTOW men going their own way.
Precisely. He sees the manosphere not as a hate group, but as a brotherhood of survival. He compares it to a counter-revolution. It's men building parallel systems, new networks, new ways of living that don't rely on female validation.
It all comes down to reclaiming sovereignty.
That's it. It's about realizing the game is rigged, so the only winning move is to stop playing by their rules.
This is heavy stuff. It completely flips the script on how we're taught to view relationships in society.
It does, and Riker's final truth in the outro of the book, it summarizes it perfectly. He says, "You are not the problem."
That is a powerful message for a lot of guys to hear, I think.
It is. I mean, we're constantly told that masculinity is toxic, that men need to do the work, that one need to apologize, and Riker says, no, the system is designed to extract resources from you. The only way to save yourself is to withdraw consent.
Withdraw consent.
Stop funding the system that hates you. Stop marrying into a contract that enslaves you.
Withdraw consent.
That really is the key takeaway here. Look, we have only scratched the surface of the data, the history, the legal analysis in this book.
Not even.
If you want the full autopsy, if you really want to see the code of the Matrix, you need to read Betrayal, is their baseline.
Absolutely. It's a dense, challenging read, but it gives you the vocabulary, the framework to understand what is happening to men in the West.
So go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now, buy the book, get the map, get the armor, and make sure you're following @Conrad Riker on Substack and Twitter X. The analysis he's putting out is essential for staying ahead of the curve.
It really is about survival at this point.
It is. So, like, subscribe, and as Riker would say, stop apologizing. We'll leave you with one question from the book to mull over. Can a civilization survive when feelings replace facts? Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll see you next time.